Hi Connor, here's the feedback on your paper 2 mock exam that you did just before Christmas. So for question 1, you've got 3 marks out of the possible 4. C was actually true, as a boy Ray Jane worried about handing in his homework on Monday mornings, and he didn't look forward to receiving feedback from his teachers. But 3 out of 4 is a good start. So moving on to question 2. You're asked to write a summary of the differences between Eddie and Henry, and you clearly do that. You say the difference is attitudes. Eddie comes across as a quieter person, only speaking to mock his father, and you give a quote to back that up. You say this is unlike Henry, who speaks trying to persuade his father to bring him home, comes across as being more respectful. You give the quote, "My dear father." So that's good. And then you mention about Henry being a talker and give examples of that. So if we look at the mark scheme for level 2, it says show some interpretation from one or both texts. Well, clearly you've looked at both texts. Attempt some inference from one or both texts. You have attempted it, however, you would have gained more marks and gone into band 3 if you'd suggested what these ideas tell you reading between the lines. So for example, the fact that Eddie mocks his father could suggest that they've got a good relationship together, that he feels comfortable to be able to joke around with his father and make fun of him, whereas Henry is more respectful to his father, so their relationship could be more distant and a bit colder than the relationship that Eddie has with his father. It's that kind of inference and reading between the lines that you're going to need to get you up to the higher marks. You could also have mentioned the fact that Eddie lives at home with his family and friends and has good food and nice surroundings, whereas Henry has been living away at boarding school for 2 years in what he believes are poor conditions, and look at the descriptions of the food and the bedding that we see, and what that infers on the 2 boys and their way of lives. Overall, I think 4 out of 8 is the mark for this question. If we look at question 3 now, which is the language question, asking you to analyse how Henry uses language to try to influence his father. This is a very good answer. You've given at least 4 different examples of the language used, and I think in every case as well you've used the correct terminology. You've talked about the hyperbole when describing the bread nearly black and the worst barley meal. You've also mentioned the simile where he's comparing him to a bear rather than Christian, and explained that it's treatment like slave labour. You've mentioned repetition and fear, emphasising the fear that he feels about letting Mr. Smith know that he's complaining. And you've also mentioned the "my dear father." He always refers to his dad as "my dear father," so again that's a repetition. So you said that he's shown respect to his father in an attempt to get him on his good side. You could also look deeper into this, and that the fact that he's been at boarding school for 2 years may show that they're not actually that close, and so by him using "my dear father" is a deliberate ploy to persuade his father to let him come home. You could also have mentioned direct address, that Henry writes using "you" and "your" throughout the letter as a way of directly appealing to his father to get him on his side. And he also uses emotive language, particularly when he talks about, "I hope, my dear father, you will let me come home at Christmas, that we may once more meet again alive, if God permit me to live as long." So again, he's trying to pull on his father's heartstrings by saying or implying that if he doesn't let him come home soon, he might never see him again because he could die from the deprivations that he's experiencing at the school. However, the answer that you've given is a good answer, and I think it comes in level 3 because you have explained clearly the effects of the writer's choices of language, you've selected a range of relevant textual detail, and you've made clear and accurate use of subject terminology. The suggestions that I've made would only be to try and get you up to that level 4 band, so well done. Moving on to question 4, where you're asked to compare how the two writers convey their different attitudes to parenting and education. You've looked at the perspectives towards education and the similarities between them, and that you say they both distrust education, and you've given quotes to back up your points. However, you've not really addressed you've not really addressed their attitudes to parenting, which I think you would need to cover to gain top marks. And you need to look more at the methods that they use to convey their attitudes. You've only really said that Jay uses humour and Henry's dad is of a serious nature in his letter. If we look at the mark scheme, we'll see that level 2 says attempts to convey ideas and perspectives and make some comment on how writers' methods are used. So I think you've just about covered those two. Your textual details and references are good. You've used some from both texts, and you've identified some different ideas and perspectives, although your perspectives are very similar, but you have looked at some different ideas as to why they have those perspectives. As I've said, to gain higher marks, you wouldn't really need to look at their different attitudes and perspectives to parenting, because clearly there are different attitudes here from Jay's, where it's a much more laid back and friendly relationship, where Henry's clearly not as close because he's sent away to school. So I think a score of 7 out of 16 for this question is appropriate. This gives you an overall score of 23 out of 40 for the reading section of the paper, which, considering this is the first time we've looked at a mock fill paper 2, is a very good score. So well done, keep up the good work. So make sure you're attending every week, and if you're unable to attend for any reason, you catch up on the work that you've missed, ideally before the lesson, before your next lesson, and also make sure that you're doing all your homeworks, because that is vital to make sure that you're maintaining and building on the skills. Well done.